What we are seeing here is an exercise of just raw political power. You are moving ahead with this nomination because you can. There are very few written rules around here. The most important rules are the unwritten ones. The most important of those rules is you keep your word. We all know that the United States Senate works, and our democracy really works, because people keep their promises. Members of this committee, on the other side, promised when Merrick Garland's nomination was given no hearing, no vote, members would not even meet with him, that never would a Supreme Court nominee be considered during an election year. You were breaking that word. And with all the rhetoric about precedent and history and everything else, and about the wrong direction that the Senate is going, in essence, you're taking another step in that direction. We sought on our side to bring into this room real people who would be affected by this nomination. We couldn't bring them to the hearing room as witnesses. We couldn't have them be present here because we are in the midst of a pandemic and we should be dealing with that health crisis instead of considering the nomination of someone who has said in effect that our present health law should be struck down. But we put them in the room here and we saw their faces and voices. Natalie Barton, whose brother was killed in Newtown and who wants common sense, sensible gun violence prevention laws that this nominee has indicated she's antithetical to upholding. Kristen and Michael Song, whose son perished as a result of the lack of safe storage of a firearm, and who wants a safe storage law, Ethan's law, nationally. Veterans who want emergency risk protection orders so that their friends and fellow veterans will not commit suicide because they should have weapons taken away if they're going to use them to commit suicide. I wish I had a nickel for every time I've heard this term, elections have consequences. We all know elections have consequences. What we are seeing here is an exercise of just raw political power. You are moving ahead with this nomination because you can, but might does not make right. And the American people put us here to do what we think is right. And in your hearts, you know that what's happening here is not right. It's not normal. So the real people eventually will judge us. History will haunt this raw exercise of political power that threatens to strike down protection for people with pre-existing conditions, including now COVID-19, as well as heart disease, asthma, cancer. About half of all Americans, at least half the people in Connecticut, 1.5 million, 130 million across the country suffer from those pre-existing conditions. Their lives are at stake. And that's why I brought into this room Conor Curran, who suffers from a disease that would have killed him by now without the Affordable Care Act. But the most important message from Conor Curran was what he wrote to this nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. He said, doctors take an oath, first do no harm. Can you take that oath? Same question might be put to us. First, do no harm. Can we take that oath? So I hope that we will recognize, my colleagues will recognize, that delaying this nomination is the right thing to do here. We're talking about moving ahead on it before we've even finished the hearing. We haven't heard from those witnesses who are going to comment on the qualifications of this nominee. And yet we're talking about moving ahead.
Mr. Chairman, would the senator yield to a question?
Well, I'm going to be finished in about a minute.
Would you yield to a question when you're finished?
Yield at that point. I just close by saying there's more information that's coming out every day. As I mentioned, CNN disclosed last night additional statements and speeches and talks, which is one of the reasons why I made this motion. There's more to be learned here. We have an opportunity and an obligation to scrutinize this nominee for a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. And what's really insulting to the nominee is the president has in effect said he wants to put her on the court as a result of this rushed process so she can decide his election. She refused to commit. She would recuse herself from sitting on that case, and that eventually will do grave harm to the court itself, to leave that question unanswered for the American people. And as we know, and she said it, the orders of the Supreme Court are not self-enforcing. The Supreme Court has no armies, no police force. Its authority depends on the trust and faith of the American people in its legitimacy. I revere the Supreme Court. I was a law clerk there. I've argued cases in front of it, including both Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg. Both gave me an equally tough time, but I trusted that they were going to take a position based on the law. We do grave damage to the Supreme Court by politicizing it in this way. And so I ask my colleagues to vote aye on this motion and delay indefinitely the proceedings on this nominee.